Melissa Hartman straightened the folds in her white dress and took 2 steps away from the mirror. The wedding was only a week away, and she still had doubts about her outfit. Andrew had said she would be beautiful in any dress, but Melissa wanted this day to be perfect, to make up for the incident 6 months ago that she preferred not to remember. "Don't think about it," she told her reflection. "It was one night, one mistake. No one will ever know." Melissa sighed and began to change her clothes. Her thoughts involuntarily returned to that business trip to Portland, to that night when she, tired after the nurses' conference, had decided to have a glass of wine at the hotel bar, away from Andrew and his constant attention. He approached her himself, a tall man with a confident posture and silver whiskers, introduced himself as Robert, said he was in town on business. They talked, first about the weather, then about work, then about books. He was so easy to talk to. He had a reliability that Andrew sometimes lacked. One glass was followed by another. My head was buzzing with wine and the feeling of freedom, and then his room and the night she'd tried so hard to forget. In the morning, she'd left while he slept. They hadn't exchanged phone numbers or last names, a one-night affair that was supposed to be a thing of the past. The ringing of the phone brought her out of her reverie. "Hi, sunshine." Andrew's voice sounded pleased. "How was the fitting?" "It's great." Melissa tried to put a carefree tone to her voice. "The dress is almost done." "Listen, I made a dinner date with my dad tonight. You'll finally get to meet him. Can you believe that in our entire 2-year relationship, you've never met once?" Robert Caulfield is Andrew's father. She really has never seen him once, only heard from her fiancé. Successful businessman, owner of a construction company. A widower who raised his son alone after his wife died of cancer 15 years ago. "Sure, that's a good idea," Melissa replied. "It's about time I met my future father-in-law." "Great. He's so excited to meet you. I'm sure you two will like each other." After the conversation, Melissa felt a prick of guilt. Andrew had been so sincere, so in love. He deserved better. But would one mistake overturn all their feelings? No. She loved him in her own way, and she was sure she could make him happy. The evening came all too quickly. Melissa nervously picked out an outfit for dinner. She settled on a simple blue dress, elegant enough but not flashy. "You're beautiful," Andrew kissed her as she came out of the bedroom. "Daddy will be thrilled." Robert Caulfield's house was in an upscale neighborhood, a 2-story mansion with a manicured lawn and a 3-car garage. When they parked, Melissa's heart was pounding like crazy. "Don't worry," Andrew squeezed her hand. "He doesn't bite, although I'll admit, he can be a little stern." The door opened, and Melissa froze. There he stood on the threshold, the same man from the bar in Portland, the same silver whiskers, the same confident posture. Only now he was dressed in an expensive suit instead of a casual shirt. Their gazes met, and Melissa saw his pupils dilate. He recognized her. "Dad, this is Melissa, my fiancée," Andrew introduced proudly. "Melissa, this is my father, Robert." "Nice to meet you." Robert's voice sounded even, but Melissa noticed the white knuckles of his fingers gripping the doorknob. "Likewise," she squeezed out. Dinner passed in a tense atmosphere, though Andrew didn't seem to notice anything. He was enthusiastically telling his father about working on a new project, about plans for their honeymoon, about the house he and Melissa had their eye on. Melissa barely touched her food. She could feel Robert's eyes on her, assessing, wary. "Melissa works at the city hospital," Andrew said. "She's the best nurse on the ward." "Yes, you said," Robert nodded. "A noble profession, helping people in their most vulnerable moments." After dessert, Andrew excused himself to take an urgent call from a co-worker. Melissa and Robert were left alone in the dining room. "What an unexpected coincidence," Robert said quietly, looking her straight in the eye. "Terrible," Melissa gulped. "Look, what happened?" "Not here," he interrupted. "Andrew could come back at any moment. Meet me tomorrow at Riverview Park at 11 in the morning." Melissa wanted to refuse, but Andrew returned at that moment, and the conversation broke off. During the night, she couldn't sleep. Andrew slept peacefully beside her, unaware of the secret his fiancé and father were keeping. Melissa stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was doing the right thing by agreeing to see Robert. But there was no choice. They had to clear the air. In the morning, she lied to Andrew about going to her friend's house to discuss the details of the bachelorette party. Riverview Park was half empty at this hour. Robert was waiting for her on a bench by the lake, dressed in casual jeans and a shirt that made him look more like the man from the bar. "Thanks for coming," he said, as Melissa sat down next to him, keeping her distance. "We don't have a choice," she replied. "We have to decide what to do." "Andrew doesn't know anything?" "Of course not. And he mustn't find out. It would kill him." Robert nodded, looking out at the lake. "I love him," Melissa continued. "What happened between us was a mistake. I didn't know who you were. You didn't know who I was." "I agree," Robert rubbed his temples. "I suggest we forget about it. Pretend it never happened." "Exactly, for Andrew's sake." That was the deal. They would play the roles of first-time future in-laws getting to know each other. No one would ever know about that night in Portland. The next few days were spent in anxious preparation for the wedding. Melissa gradually calmed down, convincing herself that the worst was over. Robert kept a detached but polite demeanor. Andrew was happy that the two most important people to him seemed to be getting along. 3 days before the wedding, Melissa made an appointment for a standard pre-wedding checkup. The usual formality, blood tests, general checkup, nothing to worry about. The next day, she got a call from the clinic. "Miss Hartman, you need to come in for a follow-up consultation." The nurse's voice sounded neutral. "Is something wrong?" Melissa's heart skipped a beat. "Dr. Wong would like to discuss your test results in person." At the clinic, Melissa nervously rubbed the strap of her purse as she waited in the waiting room. When she was ushered into the office, Dr. Natalie Wong, a middle-aged woman with an attentive gaze, pointed her to a chair. "Miss Hartman, I have some unpleasant news," Dr. Wong began. "Your HIV test came back positive." Melissa felt the floor leave beneath her feet. "That's impossible," she whispered. "There must be a mistake." "We retested. The result was confirmed." Melissa covered her face with her hands. This couldn't be happening to her. Not now, with the wedding in 2 days. "You need to inform your partner," Dr. Wong said softly. "He needs to get tested." "But I don't understand. Andrew and I have always used protection." Dr. Wong looked at her carefully. "Have you had any other partners recently?" Melissa fell silent. That night in Portland. Robert. They'd used protection, but she vaguely remembered the details. She'd had too much to drink then. "One incident, 6 months ago," she finally admitted. "A casual liaison. We used protection, but I'm not sure how thoroughly." Unfortunately, condoms don't guarantee 100% protection, even when used correctly. And when used improperly, the risk increases significantly. Melissa felt everything inside her grow icy. If she'd gotten infected from Robert, then... "I can recommend an HIV specialist." Dr. Wong's voice came as if from far away. "Modern treatments allow you to live a full life, but it's important to start therapy as soon as possible." Leaving the clinic, Melissa didn't remember how she'd gotten home. Her mind was empty. Only one thought throbbed. Robert. He should have known, should have warned her. She'd called him without thinking of the consequences. "We need to meet. Immediately." Her voice sounded foreign. They met in the same park. This time, Melissa didn't beat around the bush. "I have HIV, she said, looking him in the eye. "And I think I contracted it from you." Robert turned pale but didn't look surprised. "You knew?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. "You knew, and you didn't tell me." "Melissa, listen. You put my life at risk, and your son's life. You have precautions with Andrew, don't you?" His voice trembled. "It doesn't make any difference. You should have warned me. And what would that have changed? It would only have ruined Andrew's life." "And now what? You think it won't ruin his life?" Melissa was almost screaming, not caring about the bystanders. Robert grabbed her by the shoulders. "Listen to me. Andrew can't know. Not about us. Not about the diagnosis. Are you out of your mind? I can't marry him without telling him the truth." "You can." Robert's eyes sparkled with a strange gleam. "I'll pay for the best treatment. You'll be on medication. Your viral load will become undetectable. You'll be able to have a normal family, even children." You don't understand. Melissa pulled away. This isn't about money, it's about trust, it's about the truth. The truth will destroy my son. And lies won't? They stared at each other across the chasm they'd created themselves. Robert was the first to look away. I'll take the test, he said, though I'm sure of the result. I've been living with this diagnosis for 3 years now. 3 years? Melissa was shocked. And you keep seeing women without telling them? I've always been careful. Not careful enough, she grinned bitterly. That evening of the same day, Dr. Wong called Melissa. Miss Hartman, I've been thinking about your situation, she said. There is something odd about your case, considering what you told me about the only risky contact you had 6 months ago. Usually antibodies to HIV are detected 2 to 8 weeks after infection. What does that mean? Your partner may have had a very high viral load, which happens when a person knows about the diagnosis but doesn't take therapy. Silence hung in the receiver. Melissa, if you know who may have been the source of the infection, he needs to see a doctor immediately. One more thing. It's the law to inform partners of such a diagnosis. Intentional infection is a criminal offense. After the conversation, Melissa sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring into the void. The wedding was in 2 days. The life she'd planned was crumbling before her eyes, all because of one night, because of one man who put his own desires above other people's lives. Her phone vibrated a message from Andrew. Can't wait for our big day. Love you more than anything in the world. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She had to tell him the truth. The whole truth, no matter how painful it might be. Melissa's hands shook as she dialed Robert's number. It had been 2 hours since her conversation with Dr. Wong, and her thoughts were still rushing around in a chaotic whirlwind. The wedding was only 2 days away, 2 days that should have been the happiest of her life, but had now turned into a nightmare. Hello? Robert's voice sounded normal, as if nothing had happened. We need to meet, now. Melissa could barely contain herself from screaming. Is something wrong? There was wariness in his voice. Not over the phone. Come to Riverview Park. Same bench, in an hour. She didn't wait for an answer and dropped the call, then stared at the phone for a long time, pondering whether to call Andrew. What could she say to him? Hi, honey, I slept with your father and now I'm HIV positive. Just thinking about that conversation made her nauseous. Robert was already waiting on the bench when she arrived. He looked worried, but he held himself with his usual restraint. Melissa didn't waste time with greetings. I tested positive for HIV, she said, looking him straight in the eye. Robert's reaction told her everything. He didn't look shocked. Surprised, perhaps, but not shocked. His face had gone pale, but his eyes remained hard. You knew? It wasn't a question. You knew of your status when we were together. Robert slowly lowered himself onto the bench. He looked suddenly aged, as if the weight of the secrecy he'd been carrying was finally becoming visible. Melissa, I can explain, he began. Explain? She almost shouted. Explain why you didn't tell me you had HIV, why you put my health at risk, my life? We used protection. His voice sounded unconvincing even to himself. Which didn't work, and you knew it was possible. Robert ran a hand through his hair. He looked cornered, but unrepentant. I've been living with this diagnosis for 3 years, he finally admitted. Taking medication. The doctors said the risk of transmission is minimal. Minimal doesn't mean zero, and you should have warned me. It was my right to decide whether or not to take that risk. Would you have agreed to it? That question silenced Melissa. Of course, she would have said no. Never would she have gone with him, knowing the diagnosis. It would be too much of a risk for a casual hookup. It's not about that, she finally said. It's about choice. You took away my choice. They sat in heavy silence. The park was bustling around them, people walking, children laughing, dogs barking, ordinary life that now seemed out of reach for Melissa. What are you going to do? Robert asked. I have to tell Andrew. No! Robert turned sharply toward her. You can't. I can't marry him without telling the truth. You'll ruin his life. You'll ruin our family. And you've already ruined mine. Robert's face darkened. A strange glint appeared in his eyes that almost frightened Melissa. Listen! His voice became ingratiating. I can help. Pay for the best treatment, the most advanced drugs. You'll be able to live a normal life. The virus will become undetectable. You and Andrew will be able to have children. You don't understand. Melissa shook her head. This isn't about money. It's about trust. I can't build a marriage on lies. Sometimes a lie is more merciful than the truth. Not in this case. Robert grabbed her arm, his fingers squeezing her wrist painfully. You won't tell him. It wasn't a question, but an order. Melissa wrenched her hand away. I will tell him, both about us and the diagnosis. He deserves to know the truth. I won't let you ruin my son's life. You're the one who ruined his life when you decided to sleep with his fiancée. They stood across from each other, both breathing heavily. Melissa was the first to back away. I'll tell him tonight. Her voice sounded firmer than she felt. And you better be prepared for the consequences. She turned and walked away without looking back at Robert, who remained sitting on the bench, hunched over like an old man. Back home, Melissa sat in the empty apartment for a long time. Andrew was due back from work in 2 hours. 2 hours to gather her thoughts and find the words that would change their lives forever. She ran through different options for conversation in her mind, but they all seemed wrong. How do you tell the man you love that you betrayed him and now you're sick? That his own father was involved in this betrayal? When the key turned in the lock, Melissa sat in the living room, pale as a ghost. Andrew entered with a bouquet of flowers and a wide smile that immediately faded when he saw her face. What's wrong? He dropped the flowers and keys, running up to her. Are you not feeling well? We need to talk, Melissa said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. Andrew sat down across from her, his face anxious, but trusting. He hadn't realized that in a few minutes his world would shatter into shards. I don't know how to say this, Melissa began, her voice trailing off. But I have to be honest with you. You're scaring me. Andrew took her hands in his. Whatever it is, we'll get through this together. Melissa took a deep breath. 6 months ago, when I was on a business trip to Portland, I met a man in a bar, and I spent the night with him. Andrew's hands froze in her palms. His face seemed petrified. You cheated on me? He struggled with each word. Yes. Melissa couldn't raise her eyes to his. It was a mistake. One time. I'm so sorry. Andrew let go of her hands and stood up. He looked lost, like he didn't know where to go or what to do with his body. Why? He finally asked. Why are you telling me this now? 2 days before the wedding? Melissa forced herself to continue. Because I found out today that I have HIV, and I could only have gotten it from that man. Andrew froze in place. His face was growing paler by the second. HIV? He whispered. But that means we've always used protection, Melissa said quickly. And I just found out. You have to get tested, but the doctor said the chances of infection are minimal under the conditions we were in. Andrew sank into a chair and covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook, but he didn't cry. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were dry and lifeless. Who is he? That man? Melissa fell silent. This was it. The point of no return. Andrew, I didn't know who he was then. We didn't introduce ourselves to each other by our full names. But then, when you introduced me to my father, I recognized him. Andrew's face reflected incomprehension, then shock, then the horror of realization. No, he exhaled. Not that. It was Robert, Melissa said, her voice trembling. Your father. Andrew jumped to his feet, his face contorted with rage and pain. You're lying! You're trying to blame my father for your mistake! I'm telling the truth, Andrew. I spoke to him today. He didn't deny it. You talked. You met with him behind my back, only to find out the truth. He knew about his diagnosis, Andrew. He knew, and he didn't tell me. Andrew was thrashing around the room like a wounded animal. He was grabbing objects and putting them back, running his hands through his hair, muttering something to himself. I'll go to him, he finally said. I need to hear it from him. Andrew, wait! Melissa tried to stop him. Let's calm down first, let's talk. Talk about what? He shouted. My fiancée slept with my father! My father infected her with HIV! What is there to talk about?" He grabbed his car keys and ran out of the apartment. Melissa heard him run down the stairs without waiting for the elevator, the door slamming downstairs. Then the roar of his sports car's engine, the squeal of tires. Melissa sank to the floor and finally let herself cry. Andrew drove through the night streets, barely noticing the road. Melissa's words echoed in his head, over and over again. It was Robert, your father. How could this have happened? His father was a paragon of decency, a man of principles, a man who had taught him to respect women, to be honest, to take responsibility for his actions. The car stopped in front of Robert's house. The first-floor windows were on fire. His father was still awake. Andrew almost broke the door down, pounding on it with his fists. Robert opened the door, dressed in a house robe. He looked aged and haggard, but kept as straight as ever. "Andrew," he said calmly, "I've been waiting for you. Is that true?" Andrew burst into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Tell me Melissa is lying. Tell me you didn't sleep with her." Robert walked silently into the living room and poured himself a whiskey. He didn't offer it to his son. "I didn't know who she was," he finally said. "It was a chance encounter in a bar. And that's supposed to explain everything?" Andrew grabbed his father by the collar of his robe. "You slept with her, infected her." "I didn't mean for that to happen." Robert didn't resist. "I always use protection, always. But sometimes things happen, malfunctions." "Glitches? Malfunctions?" Andrew pushed his father away. "You knew about your diagnosis and you didn't tell her. You put her life at risk, my life. I'm on medication." Robert's voice grew harsher. "The viral load is undetectable. The risk is minimal. Not minimal enough, you see." Robert took a sip of whiskey, his hand trembling slightly. "What do you want me to say, son? That I'm sorry? Of course you're sorry. That I'm sorry? Of course I'm sorry, but I can't change the past." "Did you tell her about your diagnosis that night?" Robert lowered his eyes. The gesture said more to Andrew than any words could. "You're a monster," he whispered. "All these years I thought you were a role model, a man of honor. And you're not even a man. Don't you dare talk to me like that." Robert raised his voice. "I'm your father." "Not anymore," Andrew shook his head. "My father died today. I don't know who you are." He turned to leave. "Where are you going?" Robert followed him. "We need to talk, decide what to do next." "Decide?" Andrew stopped. "What's there to decide? There's not going to be a wedding. My fiancée is gone. My father is gone." "Don't be dramatic." Robert grabbed his arm. "Melissa will have the best treatment. I'll pay for everything. She'll be able to live a normal life. You'll be able to be together." Andrew wrenched his hand away. "You really think money is going to solve this problem? That I'll be able to forget that my father slept with my fiancée and infected her with HIV? That I'll be able to trust her or you again?" "Son, think about it. It was a mistake. An accident." "Accident?" Andrew grabbed a heavy crystal ashtray off the table and hurled it at the wall. Shards scattered across the room. "The fact that you slept with her was an accident. That you didn't tell her about your diagnosis is not an accident. It's a choice, your choice." Robert stood silent, his face white as chalk. "I hope you pay for this," Andrew said quietly. "If not legally, then somehow. But you'll pay." He left the house, slamming the door loudly. The morning was gray and rainy, as if nature itself reflected Melissa's mood. She stayed up all night waiting for Andrew to return. He didn't come home. He didn't answer the phone. At 7 in the morning, she gave up and showered, trying to wash away the feeling of grime that seemed to be embedded in her skin. Her phone rang as she toweled herself dry. Without looking at the screen, she grabbed the receiver, hoping to hear Andrew's voice. "Hello?" Her voice shook with hope. "Miss Hartman?" The male voice was unfamiliar. "This is Detective Lewis Sullivan from the police department." Melissa's heart dropped. "Yes, it's me." She began to dress herself automatically, clutching the phone between her ear and shoulder. "I need you to come to Robert Caulfield's house, as soon as possible." "Is something wrong?" Fear squeezed her throat. "With Andrew?" The pause on the other end of the wire seemed interminable. "Andrew is fine, Miss Hartman, but his father is dead, and we need to ask some questions." Melissa felt the room swirl around her. She sank to the edge of the bed, unable to stand. "Dead?" she whispered. "How?" "We're investigating the circumstances." The detective's voice was professionally restrained. "A car is on its way to pick you up. Be ready in 15 minutes. The call ended, and Melissa was left sitting in a daze. Robert was dead. The man who a few days ago was just her fiancé's father, then her casual lover, then the cause of her illness. And now he's dead. A police car brought her to the Caulfield house in less than half an hour. The area around the house was cordoned off with yellow tape. Several police cars, a forensics van. Neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering, pointing at the house. Detective Lewis Sullivan was waiting for her at the front door, a tall, middle-aged man with shrewd eyes and a tired face. "Miss Hartman," he held out his hand. "Thank you for coming. Follow me, please." He led her into the house, past police officers and people in white suits taking pictures, taking samples, making notes. "Where's Andrew?" Melissa asked, looking around. "At the station," the detective replied, "giving a statement." Robert's office was in perfect order, save for the body on the floor covered by a white sheet. Melissa turned away, unable to look. "You don't have to look at it," the detective said, noticing her reaction. "Let's go into the living room." They sat down on the couch, the same one where only a week ago she and Andrew had been having tea with Robert, discussing the details of the wedding. "What happened?" Melissa asked, her voice sounding lifeless. "Mr. Caulfield was found dead this morning by his housekeeper," the detective replied, watching her reaction. "Preliminarily, death was caused by a blow to the head with a heavy object. The object found at the scene is a figurine from his desk. It has the fingerprints of his son, Andrew Caulfield, on it." Melissa covered her mouth with her hand, holding back a scream. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Andrew couldn't—" "Miss Hartman," the detective leaned forward. "I need you to tell me everything that happened yesterday. Where you were, where Andrew was, what you talked about." Melissa stared at him, not knowing what to say, how to explain all the craziness of yesterday, the diagnosis, the confession, Andrew's rage. "It's complicated," she finally said. Personal." "I understand," the detective nodded. "But a man is dead, and his son is the prime suspect. I need to know the truth." Melissa took a deep breath and started talking. About the business trip to Portland 6 months ago. About the chance encounter with Robert at the bar. About the shock when they met as future in-laws. About her diagnosis. About Robert's confession. About how she'd told Andrew everything. The detective listened without interrupting, only occasionally making notes in his notebook. His face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Andrew was furious," Melissa finished. "He ran out of the apartment, said he was going to his father's. I don't know what happened next. He didn't come home." "What time did he leave?" "About 9 o'clock at night." The detective nodded, writing something down. "Miss Hartman, do you know if Andrew owns a gun?" "No." Melissa shook her head. "He's never been interested in guns. Why do you ask?" "Standard procedure," the detective replied, though something flashed in his eyes that made Melissa wary. At that moment, another police officer entered the room and whispered something in the detective's ear. Sullivan frowned, then nodded. "Miss Hartman," he said, standing up. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come down to the station with me. We've run into some complications." "What complications?" Melissa stood up as well, feeling her heart begin to beat faster. "Andrew Caulfield has confessed to killing his father," Detective Lewis Sullivan grumbled as he took the first sip of his cooled coffee. There was an unaccustomed silence in the police station. It was early morning, the day after Robert Caulfield's murder. On the desk in front of the detective was a folder of crime scene photos, the preliminary medical examiner's report, and Andrew Caulfield's confession report. "Something doesn't add up," Sullivan muttered, rereading the statement for the third time. Andrew's confession was too perfect, too detailed. He described how in a rage he grabbed a heavy statue from his father's desk and hit Robert over the head. How Robert fell without making a sound. How he, Andrew, realizing what he had done, threw the statue next to the body and ran away. Everything matched the evidence found at the crime scene. Even the time of death, between 10 and 11 p.m., matched Andrew's account of when he'd been at his father's house. And yet something was bothering Sullivan, something in Andrew's eyes as he testified. Not remorse, not grief, not shock. Something else? Determination? "Detective!" A young female officer knocked on the door. "The results of the victim's blood work have come in." "Thank you, Rodriguez." Sullivan took the outstretched envelope. The results confirmed what Melissa Hartman had said. Robert Caulfield was HIV positive. What's more, the test showed he wasn't on antiretroviral medication, despite his long-standing diagnosis. His viral load was dangerously high. Sullivan leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen thoughtfully on the desk. So Robert had deliberately endangered his partners, knowingly infected his own son's fiancée. "The motive is getting stronger," the detective muttered. Andrew Caulfield sat in the interrogation room to which he had been transferred from his cell. He looked haggard, pale face, red eyes, 3 days stubble, but he held himself upright, with the dignity he had inherited from his father. "Good morning, Mr. Caulfield." Sullivan sat down across from him. "How are you feeling? How must a man who killed his father feel?" Andrew's voice sounded lifeless. "Do you realize you're facing a serious charge, possibly first degree?" "I completely understand, Detective." Sullivan opened the file folder. "Tell me again what happened last night." He watched Andrew's reaction carefully. "I already told you everything." Andrew looked him straight in the eye. "I found out from Melissa that my dad slept with her 6 months ago, that he knew about his HIV status and didn't warn her, that he had effectively destroyed our lives. I went to see him, we argued, I grabbed a statue and hit him. Once. He died instantly. And then? And then I sat in the car until morning, thinking, deciding what to do, and then I came to turn myself in. Do you regret what you did?" Andrew was silent for a long time before answering. "I regret bringing it to this, that I couldn't control my anger. But Father, he deserved to be punished for what he did." Sullivan nodded, making notes. "Mr. Caulfield, where were you between midnight and 6 in the morning?" Andrew frowned. "I told you. In my car, a couple blocks from my father's house." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No, I was alone." After the interrogation, Sullivan released Andrew to his cell and returned to his office. He had more information to gather about the Caulfield family and Robert himself. "Detective," Sergeant Morales called out to him. "Got a visitor for you. Says it's about the Caulfield case." Waiting for him in the reception area was an elegant, Asian-looking woman in her 50s. "Detective Sullivan? I'm Dr. Natalie Wong." She held out her hand. "I'm the Caulfield family doctor. Used to be." "Dr. Wong, it's very good to see you." Sullivan shook the outstretched hand. "I was just about to contact you." They walked to his office, and Dr. Wong, refusing coffee, got straight to the point. "I learned about Robert's murder from the news," she said, "and about his son confessing. I had to come." "I appreciate your initiative," Sullivan nodded. "What can you tell me about Robert Caulfield?" Dr. Wong was silent, as if gathering her thoughts. "I was his doctor for 10 years, she finally said. "I diagnosed him with HIV 3 years ago, prescribed therapy, explained all the risks, explained his obligation to inform his partners. And he didn't comply? He did at first, but then he stopped coming to appointments. He stopped taking tests. I called him, reminded him, but he always made excuses. Why didn't you inform the relevant authorities?" Dr. Wong lowered her eyes. "I should have, but Robert was an influential man. He built the hospital where I work, sponsored our clinic, and then I had no proof he wasn't taking the drugs or informing his partners, only suspicions." Sullivan nodded understandingly. "When was the last time you spoke to Robert?" "The day before yesterday," Dr. Wong replied. "I called him after I informed Melissa Hartman of her diagnosis. I was pretty sure she'd contracted it from him. There were too many coincidences." "And what did he say?" "He denied everything. Said he always used protection, that he couldn't be the source of the infection. But his voice, I knew he was lying." Sullivan leaned back in his chair. "Dr. Wong, what do you know about Robert's relationship with his son?" The woman hesitated. That's a difficult question. On the surface, they seemed close. Robert was proud of Andrew's accomplishments, spoke of him often, but I always sensed a certain tension, like Andrew was trying to live up to his father's expectations but never quite reaching. Robert was demanding? Very. A perfectionist. He expected perfection from himself and from others, especially from his son. And how did Andrew feel about his father? With respect. With fear, perhaps, but not with warmth. Dr. Wong was quiet. You know, Detective, there's something else. Something I've been thinking about all the way here. I'm listening to you. 3 years ago, when I diagnosed Robert with HIV, he told me how he contracted it, from a casual hookup during a business trip to Asia. But then, in the course of his treatment, I think he started to enjoy taking risks. What do you mean? He's hinted several times that the arousal is heightened when the partner is unaware of his status, that it gives him a special power. Dr. Wong shuddered. I wrote it off as psychological defense mechanisms, an attempt to rationalize his condition, but now I think I was wrong, that he really enjoyed the power. Sullivan made a note in his notebook. Thank you for your candor, Dr. Wong, he said. It helps to develop a more complete psychological profile of the victim. When Dr. Wong left, Sullivan decided to check Robert Caulfield's financial and medical records. He requested the necessary warrants, and by late afternoon was examining an impressive stack of documents. Bank statements showed regular cash withdrawals that were nowhere to be found in official expenses. The call list contained numerous numbers registered to disposable SIM cards. He was paying for silence, Sullivan muttered. The question is, to whom and for what? The answer turned up in the medical records. In the 3 years since his diagnosis, Robert Caulfield had anonymously paid for the treatment of 4 women with HIV, all at the same clinic where Dr. Wong worked. All had been diagnosed shortly after exposure. Sullivan leaned back in his chair, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had been revealed. Robert Caulfield hadn't just accidentally infected several women. He'd done it systematically, and then paid them off by providing them with treatment through Dr. Wong, who turned a blind eye. 4 known cases, the detective muttered. How many more unknowns? He called Andrew Caulfield back in for questioning. Mr. Caulfield, Sullivan began, as Andrew sat down across from him. I have some new questions. I'm all ears, Detective. Andrew looked calm, even detached. Were you aware of the other women your father infected with HIV? Andrew tensed slightly, but quickly pulled himself together. No, I only found out about Melissa. But you're not surprised that there were others? After everything I've learned about my father in the last few days, nothing would surprise me anymore. Sullivan nodded, flipping through the papers in the folder. Mr. Caulfield, tell me more about your conversation with your father that night. Andrew swallowed, clearly gathering his thoughts. I arrived at his house around 10 o'clock at night, was out of my mind with rage, rang the doorbell. He opened, in his robe like he was going to sleep. I burst into the house and immediately pounced on him with accusations. What did you tell him? That I knew about his affair with Melissa, that I knew about his diagnosis, that he's a monster for keeping it from her, that he ruined our lives. And how did he react? At first he tried to deny it. Then when he realized it was useless, he made excuses, said he meant no harm, that he was using protection, that it was an accident. Did you believe him? No, Andrew shook his head, especially when he started insinuating that Melissa had herself to blame, that a woman who cheats on her fiancé deserves to be punished. And what happened next? I lost control. Andrew closed his eyes as if reliving that moment all over again. He was standing by the table, grinning like the whole thing was some kind of joke, and next to him was this damn statue, the Greek replica I gave him last Christmas. I grabbed it and hit him, once. He went down right away, didn't even cry out. Sullivan watched Andrew's face carefully as he told the story. Not a shadow of regret, just cold determination. What did you feel at that moment? Nothing, Andrew answered honestly. Absolutely nothing. Like it wasn't me. Like I was watching from the sidelines. And then? Then I left the house, got in my car, and drove around town for a long time, thinking. When it dawned on me, I decided to give up." Sullivan nodded, closing the folder. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Caulfield." After the interrogation, Sullivan went to the hospital where Melissa Hartman worked. She had just finished her shift and looked exhausted. "Miss Hartman," Sullivan showed his badge. "Can I talk to you?" They sat down in the small hospital cafeteria. Melissa was twirling a cup of untouched coffee in her hands. "How are you?" the detective asked. "How can a person in my situation be?" She grinned bitterly. "Sick with an incurable disease. The groom is in prison for killing his own father. Wedding canceled. The future is uncertain." "Tell me about your conversation with Andrew when you informed him of the diagnosis and the connection to his father." Melissa took a deep breath. "It was a terrible conversation. I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't realize how hard. Andrew didn't believe it at first. Thought I was joking. Then when he realized it was true, he was shocked. Then he was furious." "Did he threaten you?" "No, not at all." Melissa shook her head. "He was angry at me for cheating, of course, but his anger was directed mostly at my father. He yelled that Robert should have told me about his diagnosis, that he had put not only me in danger, but himself." "And that's when he decided to go to his father?" "Yes, I tried to stop him, told him we needed to think things through, to calm down, but he was out of his mind, said he had to hear the truth from his father. And he left." "Did you try to contact him afterward?" "Yes, called several times. He didn't answer. I thought he just didn't want to talk to me after everything he'd learned. And then this morning, found out about Robert's death." Sullivan nodded, making notes. "Miss Hartman, what can you tell me about Andrew's character? Is he prone to violence?" "Never," Melissa answered firmly. "In the entire 2 years of our relationship, I've never once seen him lose control. He's always been calm, judicious. Even in anger, he's remained composed." "Then how do you explain what happened?" Melissa was silent for a long time before answering. "I think something broke in him the moment he found out that his father wasn't the man he'd thought he was all his life. That his whole life, all his values were based on lies. That may have pushed him over the edge." Leaving the hospital, Sullivan stopped by Robert Caulfield's house one more time. He walked slowly through the study where the murder had taken place, trying to reconstruct in his mind the picture of the crime. The statuette, a replica of a Greek Discobolus, lay on the desk in an evidence bag. A heavy bronze figure on a marble base. The kind you could really kill a man with one blow. Sullivan pulled out his phone and looked at the crime scene photos. Robert's body was face down, struck in the back of the head. Traces of blood on the carpet, on the wall, on the statue itself, all consistent with Andrew's testimony. Back at the station, Sullivan sat in his office for a long time, analyzing all the data collected. Motive, opportunity, murder weapon, everything pointed to Andrew Caulfield. And yet something kept the detective on edge. He went through Robert Caulfield's medical records again. 4 women he'd paid to treat, 4 lives he'd ruined, and those were just the ones Sullivan knew about. How many more were victims who didn't want to fight? The next morning, Sullivan called Andrew back in for questioning. He looked even more tired, but still held himself as straight as ever. "Mr. Caulfield," the detective began, "I've examined your father's papers. Melissa wasn't the first woman he'd infected with HIV. "I had a hunch," Andrew replied quietly. "I need to know the whole truth about what happened that night." Andrew looked at the detective for a long moment, then took a deep breath. "I've already told you everything. I arrived at my father's house. We had an argument. I hit him with a statue. He died instantly. I ran away in a panic and turned myself in to the police in the morning." "You don't regret what you did?" "I regret that I should have done it," Andrew said quietly. "But I don't regret what I did. My father was a monster, detective. He knowingly infected women with a deadly disease. Enjoyed their suffering. The law couldn't stop him. He had too much money and influence. I did what I had to do. Even if it means spending the rest of your life in prison?" "Even so," Andrew nodded. "That's the price of truth I'm willing to pay." Sullivan stared at the young man in front of him for a long moment. There was no remorse in his eyes, only a firm conviction that he had done the right thing. "Do you know what I think, Mr. Caulfield?" the detective said at last. "I think you weren't just protecting Melissa. You were protecting all the women your father could have infected in the future, all of that man's potential victims. Perhaps, Andrew replied quietly. But that doesn't change the point. I killed a man, and I'm willing to take responsibility for it. Even if the court finds it to be premeditated murder? Even so. Sullivan closed the file folder and stood up. I'm wrapping up the investigation, Mr. Caulfield. The evidence points to you. Your confession is consistent with the case file. The motive is obvious. The case will be forwarded to the prosecutor's office in the coming days. I understand. Andrew nodded. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Something that should be in the report? Andrew thought for a moment. Tell them I'm not a monster like my father. I didn't take pleasure in the killing. I just did what I thought was right, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Sullivan nodded slowly. I'll pass on your words, he said, heading for the door. Detective, Andrew called out to him. One more thing. Take care of Melissa. She's a victim in all this. A victim of my father, my failure to protect her, my own mistake. She deserves a chance at a normal life. I'll do everything in my power, Sullivan promised. As he left the interrogation room, the detective stood in the hallway for a long time, pondering what he had just heard. There was no right and wrong in this case, pure and simple. Just people making choices, right or wrong, and living with the consequences. That evening, Sullivan stood on the doorstep of Melissa's apartment. She opened the door, looking surprised. Detective Sullivan? Is something wrong? No, Miss Hartman. The detective shook his head. I just wanted to let you know that the investigation is complete. Andrew Caulfield will be charged with the murder of his father. Melissa nodded silently. He asked me to take care of you, Sullivan added. Said you deserve a chance at a normal life. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. After everything I've done, he still thinks of me, she whispered. Andrew has made his choice, Miss Hartman. Now it's up to you to make yours.